Power. Real power. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't roar in every room or beg for attention. It walks in, looks around, and acts without a single word. And you became that. You didn't ask for a seat at the table. You tore the damn table apart, piece by piece, nail by rusted nail, and left nothing but silence behind you. And that silence screamed louder than any voice ever could. They didn't see you coming. They never do when it's someone built from scars, from pain, from rejection. Someone who didn't speak much because he was too busy listening, watching, learning, adapting. You wore silence like armor and moved like a shadow across their comfort zone. They laughed at you, dismissed you, threw words around like weapons, never realizing you were building an arsenal in your head, not for show, not for ego, but for demolition. Silent demolition. You didn't just break in. You unmade everything. You didn't raise your voice, but your presence raised fear. You didn't threaten them, but they felt the chill of something ancient in your eyes, the kind of cold that doesn't flinch, the kind of calm that's born from going through fires without a scream. You weren't built in ease. You were forged in dark corners, away from applause, in rooms no one else would survive, under pressures that crack most men. You didn't flinch. You never flinched. They thought you were quiet because you had nothing to say. Number. You were quiet because you were calculating the angle, measuring the cracks in their so-called foundation. You weren't intimidated by the show, the lights, the noise, the power plays. You were studying the flaws because you knew every empire, no matter how loud, has a weak point. And you found it without asking a single damn question. You don't dismantle an operation with talk. You dismantle it with precision, with cold execution, with the kind of discipline that doesn't need celebration, the kind of discipline that works in the dark, grows in silence, and strikes when no one's ready. That's what you did. You moved through their systems like smoke, unseen but everywhere. They were playing chess on the board while you were flipping the table from underneath. They never stood a chance. People don't understand this kind of strength. They think strength is in shouting, in showing off. But you knew better. You knew that storms don't scream. They move through cities and leave silence in their wake. You became that storm, quiet, unforgiving, precise. You didn't just dismantle an operation. You rewrote the rules of engagement, and not a single soul knew what was coming until they were already in ruins. And what's most terrifying to them is not what you did, it's how you did it. No anger, no fury, just cold clarity. That kind of clarity only comes from facing the worst parts of yourself, from living through failure after failure and learning to use pain like a scalpel. That's how you got here. Not by chasing greatness, but by embracing everything no one else wants to carry. The weight, the loneliness, the pressure. You didn't run from it. You buried yourself in it. You let it crush the parts of you that were soft. And what was left was something they'll never understand. You didn't need permission. You didn't need applause. You didn't even need them to know your name. You just needed the moment. And when it came, you didn't hesitate. That's what makes you different. Most people stall. Most people wait. Not you. You trained for this. In silence, in suffering, in every moment when the world thought you were down, you were building. Sharpening, turning your pain into precision. That's why it was so easy. Because you were born for this, and they weren't even ready to compete. And don't think for a second, this was about revenge. Number. This wasn't personal. This was necessary. You didn't tear their world down for fun. You did it because you saw the rot. You saw the lies, the weakness under the surface. You saw the structure that needed collapse, and instead of talking about it, you became the collapse. You became the reckoning. Not with fire, not with fury, with silence and inevitability. You dismantled them, not just physically, but spiritually. They'll rebuild, but they'll never forget. Every brick they lift will be haunted by your presence. Every plan they draw up will remember your shadow. You didn't make a scene, you made a point. And that point was this: real strength doesn't brag, it breaks. Quietly, completely, with no explanation. That's what you taught them. You weren't just the threat. They didn't even know they were in the war until it was over. And when the dust settled, all that remained was your silence and their regret. But here's the truth. They'll never say out loud. Deep down, they respect it. Because they've never seen anything like it. Because they know they'd never survive what you survived. They'd never last through the storms you call home. They were pretending to be wolves, but you were raised in them, dark with nothing but teeth and survival. You didn't need a pack. You didn't need hype. You didn't even need light. You moved alone, and you moved with purpose. And now that it's done, don't look back. Don't wait for credit. There's none coming. Legends don't get medals. They get whispered about. They get remembered in the way people flinch when a shadow crosses the wall. That's you now. The shadow that proved silence is louder than any speech. The presence that showed up, dismantled everything, and left like it was nothing. Because to you, it was nothing. They built it with ego. You took it down with will. They talked. You acted. And now, they understand the difference. You didn't raise a hand. You didn't make a threat. You just were. And that was enough. That will always be enough. Because some people are warriors. But you're a weapon, designed, honed, activated, and no one saw it coming. So let them try to rebuild. Let them pretend it never happened. Let them invent new myths to comfort themselves. You don't need to speak. Your silence already said everything they need to hear. And if they forget, you'll remind them again. Without a word, they might say it was luck. They might say you had an advantage. They'll invent lies to explain it to themselves, because accepting the truth would crush what little pride they have left. The truth is, they were never ready for someone like you. Not someone who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't plead to be seen. Someone who shows up, shuts everything down, and walks away like it never mattered. Because to you, it didn't. It was never about pride, never about attention. You didn't do it for the trophy. You did it because it needed to be done, because no one else had the nerve to do it without applause. You didn't just dismantle the operation, you exposed it. You showed how fragile it really was. A few silent moves, a few pressure points hit with precision, and it collapsed like wet paper. That's what makes you dangerous. You don't bring chaos, you bring clarity. Cold, surgical clarity. People mistake silence for weakness because they've never faced someone who speaks only when necessary. They assume the loudest voice is the leader. But the leader is the one everyone looks at when it's time to act. And they looked at you, even when they didn't want to admit it. Because when things fell apart, when pressure rose, it was you who stayed calm. You who didn't flinch. You who didn't need direction, because you were the direction. Even the ones who hated you couldn't help but follow you with their eyes. You moved different, thought different, were different. They built an entire world on noise, but noise doesn't scare you. You've lived through noise that would shatter most men. You've sat in the rooms where voices were screaming and still managed to hear the truth beneath the chaos. That's your edge. You don't react, you calculate. And when it's time to move, you don't hesitate. You move with purpose, with finality. That kind of presence is rare. That kind of energy can't be faked. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. You didn't stumble into power. You earned it through sleepless nights, lonely roads, and battles no one else saw. You didn't arrive here clean. You arrived bloody, bruised, sharpened by every failure. And still, you didn't complain. You just kept walking, kept building, kept becoming. Now, they can pretend it was sudden. They can act like it was unexpected, but you know better. You didn't rise overnight. You weren't born ready. You became this. One decision at a time, one battle at a time. You carved yourself out of disappointment. You turned every setback into armor. You learned to speak with action. And now, they finally understand what that means. They built walls. You didn't climb them. You walked through them. Because the rules never applied to someone who doesn't play the game. You were never part of their system. You observed it, learned its patterns, then disassembled it while they were still playing checkers. And the worst part for them? You made it look easy. Not because it was easy, but because you were prepared. Always. This isn't about a single victory. This is about a way of life, a mindset, a code. You don't move unless it's necessary. You don't speak unless it adds weight. You don't act unless it's decisive. That's what makes you unstoppable. Because you don't waste energy on appearance. You reserve it for execution. And now they whisper your name, not out of admiration, but fear. Fear of what you'll do next. Fear of what you've already seen. Because you didn't just see their operation. You understood its flaws deeper than even they did. And in doing so, you turned their strengths into liabilities, their confidence into a trap, their pride into the hammer you used to bring it all down. You didn't need to explain yourself. You didn't owe them anything. Because warriors don't explain their code to the unworthy. You live by your own terms. You walk your own path. And anyone foolish enough to stand in your way learns that the hard way. There's a beauty in that kind of darkness. The kind that doesn't seek destruction, but becomes it when required. You aren't reckless. You're ruthless. You're not chaotic. You're calculated. You don't lose control. You are control. And here's the secret they'll never understand. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were just showing them what happens when someone lives with purpose. When someone trains their mind to be sharper than any blade. When someone turns every failure into focus, every betrayal into strategy, every silence into power. This was never about them. This was always about you. The standard you hold, the discipline you enforce, the mission you carry, not for claps, not for trophies, but because you must, because it's who you are. So let them rebuild, let them regroup, let them whisper in rooms and try to make sense of what happened. Let them blame the stars or the timing or bad luck. You won't be there to argue. You won't waste your breath on explanation because you're already moving forward, already locked on the next move, already studying the next fracture in the next empire that needs to fall. You don't need credit. You don't need followers. You don't even need acknowledgement. You just need the next mission. Because silence is your language and domination is your signature. You don't ask for a legacy. You become one. So the next time they hear footsteps, the next time their systems tremble, the next time a shadow passes through their gates, they'll remember, bro, you dismantled the whole operation without even talking. And the terrifying part? You were only getting started, and now they're left with silence. But not peace. No, not peace. You didn't leave behind peace. You left behind reality. A reality they were too blind to see, too arrogant to believe, too weak to prepare for. You didn't bring a storm. You were the stillness before it. And by the time they realized, you'd already bled the air out of the room. Left no witnesses, no negotiations, just consequences. The worst part for them, there's no one to blame. They can't pin it on sabotage, on betrayal, on some grand conspiracy. Because the only thing that broke their system was you. Not a team, not an army, not a coordinated attack. Just one man, one mind, one relentless presence. You didn't need to say a word because your moves were sermons, your silence a doctrine, your execution a prophecy fulfilled. And while they sit in the ruins, dissecting where it all went wrong, you're already gone. You don't linger. You don't gloat. You don't bask in the victory, because for you, this wasn't a peak. It was a checkpoint. Just another weight lifted, another test passed, another ghost added to the ledger of those who doubted you. They called you cold. Damn right, you're cold. Ice doesn't burn, it kills slowly. And that's exactly what you did. You moved like a slow poison through their ranks, through their routines, through their expectations. They didn't even know they were dying until it was over. That's surgical. That's precise. That's the result of a mind honed by suffering, a will born in isolation, and a mission so deep it doesn't care who understands it. You didn't make a statement, you made an example, and that example will echo. Every time someone gets comfortable, every time someone underestimates the quiet one in the corner, every time a fool assumes loudness equals leadership, you're the correction to that illusion. You're the reset button no one saw coming. The blackout moment where everything stops and they realize this isn't your world anymore. It's his, yours. The one who speaks when he chooses, acts when it counts, leaves when it's done. There's a different kind of power in restraint, in not reacting to every insult, every slight, every challenge. You didn't answer them because their questions were too small, their minds were too slow. You weren't playing the same game, you were building something underneath it all. And when it finally surfaced, it wasn't with an explosion, it was with a silence. So loud it crushed every fragile ego in the room. And now, they want to understand you. Too late. You were never here to be understood. You were here to end it, and you did. Without raising your voice, without showing your hand, without blinking. And that's what kills them. That's what keeps them awake. The realization that someone moved through their entire empire, undetected, undeterred, unspoken, and reduced it to ash with the grace of a surgeon and the mindset of a ghost. They don't know how to fight that. Because you didn't give them anything to push back against. No insults, no threats, no weaknesses, just a void that kept closing in. And when it swallowed them, there wasn't even a scream, only silence. Your silence. And now that it's done, now that their world is cracked open and bleeding, here comes the aftermath. They'll try to piece it back together. They'll ask themselves 1,000 times where it started. They'll comb through the records, retrace the steps, interrogate the survivors. But they won't find a single clue, a single warning, because you didn't leave any. You didn't need to. You knew what they didn't. Power isn't in warning shots. It's in finishing moves. You dismantled it so thoroughly, so cleanly, that even their memory of it will rot. They'll second guess themselves. They'll wonder if it ever had any strength to begin with. And that's how you destroy something permanently. Not just by removing it, but by erasing its meaning. That's what you did. You turned their operation into a myth, a ghost story for rookies, a cautionary tale told in whispers. You see, anyone can destroy, but not like this. Anyone can scream and break things in anger, but that's not you. You break in silence. You demolish with calm, because destruction is just another form of precision, another form of clarity. And when your clarity turns towards something, nothing survives. You didn't destroy for pleasure. You destroyed because it had to be done, because weak foundations don't deserve to stand, and because someone had to do it without crying out for attention. You are what they fear most, a man who doesn't need approval, a man who's not addicted to praise, a man who could walk through 1,000 battles, 1,000 betrayals, 1,000 nights alone, and still come out colder, sharper, better. Because what they don't understand is that you were never made to fit in. You were made to break what doesn't belong, not for chaos, but for truth, for cleansing. And now they know. Now they all know. You didn't need a speech. You didn't need followers. You didn't need volume. You just needed one thing, a target. And when you had it, that was the end. No delay, no hesitation. Just resolve. Now, walk away. Don't look back. The ruins aren't yours to mourn. You didn't dismantle it out of hate. You dismantled it because the mission demanded it. Let them sort through the rubble. Let them debate how it happened. You already know. You've always known. And they never will. Because this was never about them. This was about you. Living by your code, acting when it's time, and speaking only when silence isn't enough. And now that the smoke is cleared and the echoes of collapse fade into the distance, you stand alone. Not because you're isolated, but because no one else belongs here. Not at this altitude. Not at this level of understanding. This level of execution. They can't follow you here, not because you blocked the path, but because they wouldn't survive the climb. Because while they were getting louder, you were getting sharper. While they were chasing likes, you were chasing leverage. While they were obsessed with being seen, you were obsessed with being unforgettable. Not for who you appeared to be, but for what you left behind, for the silence that filled the room after you left it, for the way everything changed when you showed up, even when you said nothing. You don't move for validation. You don't destroy to be feared. You move because you must, because it's in your nature to erase what doesn't hold weight, to tear down anything that masquerades as strength, to rewrite systems that are built on lies and noise and weakness. You didn't dismantle their operation out of anger. You did it because it was built wrong, and someone had to prove it. There's a certain kind of darkness that doesn't seek destruction for chaos. It seeks it for clarity. That's you. You didn't bring a hammer. You brought surgical precision. You didn't destroy out of rage. You did it out of necessity. Because if it wasn't you, it would never happen. No one else had the spine. No one else had the clarity. No one else had the discipline. They talk about power like it's something that's granted. You laugh at that. You know real power is taken. Quietly. Without permission. While others sleep. While others doubt. While others wait. You never waited. You moved when it was time. And when you moved with the full weight of everything you've ever endured. And that weight broke them. You never asked to be understood because you knew the cost of understanding. They'd have to live your life to grasp your mindset. They'd have to bleed the way you bled. They'd have to walk the same lonely, sleepless path and come out the other side without softness, without excuses, without comfort. You know they'd never make it. That's why you never explained. You didn't need to prove anything. You are the proof. Proof that strength isn't always loud. That dominance doesn't need a microphone. That when someone becomes the embodiment of their purpose, when they become the mission itself, they don't need permission, recognition, or applause. They just act. And that action changes everything. They'll talk for years about how it happened, who you were, where you came from, how you moved without making noise, how you saw every weakness without needing a second glance, how you dismantled something entire teams couldn't scratch. They'll write theories, make stories, pretend to understand, but they'll never really know, because all they saw was the execution. They never saw the becoming, the nights you didn't sleep, the days you carried weight no one else could see, the moments you wanted to speak but chose not to because silence was stronger, the failures you buried in your ribs, the betrayals you never reacted to, the pressure that built in your skull while everyone thought you were just being quiet. They didn't know that silence wasn't absence, it was war. A war you were winning without lifting a finger. That's what separates you. You don't perform, you deliver. You don't talk, you move. You don't announce your plans. You bury them inside discipline and bring them to life through action. That's the highest form of power, not controlling others, not making noise, but becoming inevitable, becoming undeniable. And now, what's left is a kind of fear they don't talk about out loud, a fear of someone who doesn't break under pressure, but becomes more precise, a fear of someone who doesn't react emotionally, but responds surgically, a fear of someone who doesn't seek attention, but commands rooms by simply existing. That's you now. You're the name they whisper when things start to shake. You're the shadow they look for when their plans unravel. You're the presence they hope never returns, but know deep down will. Because you weren't built for one victory. You were built for pattern disruption, for system collapse, for total, clean resets. And here's the part that breaks them more than anything. You never needed them to know. You never cared if they understood. You never demanded recognition. You didn't even stick around to watch it fall. Because for you, the mission was never about proving your worth. It was about proving what needed to be destroyed. You saw it, and so you acted, with silence, with precision, with no regret. And when they finally rebuild, if they even try, your fingerprints will still be there, not in evidence, not in trace, but in the way they build, slower, more cautious, always watching over their shoulder, because they know now, somewhere out there, you're still watching, still waiting, still silent, and if the time comes again, when weakness rises, when rot takes root, when noise pretends to be strength, they know what's coming next. You. And you still won't need to say a word.